Lawyers of Reddit, what was your hold it moment where you knew you would win? Story 1. I had a client W was accused of taking a young woman's car and then crashing it, fleeing the scene. The girl testified at trial that she had given him the keys that night because she was drunk and would never, ever drink and drive. Apparently, she was not aware that I had requested and obtained a copy of her driving record, which swed she received a DUI a month after the incident. I still remember the look on her face when I handed her driving record to her and said, "Except for that one time you got caught a month later, right?" The look on the judge's face was equally memorable. Story 2. I trapped a defendant pretty badly one time. He testified in a depo he had a green arrow for his left turn and that my client ran the red. Unfortunately for him, the additional turn lane arrow was installed 2 months after the wreck. Case settled for policy limits a week later. Story 3. I'm not a lawyer, but I took my old landlord to court when I was in college. They stole my security deposit over bull. They claimed I trashed the place, not knowing that I took pictures and video when I moved in and out. Their evidence was a VHS quality recording of going through a perfectly clean apartment in better condition than it was when I moved in. But then they opened up the top of the stove and found a single piece of elbow macaroni under it, elding it up triumphantly. That was the crux of their argument. The judge was not amused, and I got all my money back plus my lawyer fees and the filing fee. She then fought against her own lawyer to avoid paying him. Asshole. Edit. Anytime you move into a place, take pictures, take video, make notes about any damage. When you move out, do the same thing along with noting any repairs you made. Pretty hard to argue against solid evidence. Protect yourself. Story 4. It wasn't at trial, but during a deposition on a case where 2 former employees decided to start their own company in a very niche market, but decided to make their plans on company laptops, they unsuccessfully tried to brick. One of the defendants was the one being deposed. She said she answered to a higher power than the company. When pressed on what that meant, she said herself. That got reused prominently at trial. Edit. Because multiple people have asked and finding a clarification in the replies might be annoying. There isn't anything illegal about wanting to leave one company and start your own. The problem was they did it, which was trying to poach existing clients while still employed, which breached their fiduciary duty, particularly of loyalty. I believe we also went after them for intentional interference with contract, as they weren't trying to solicit new clients for their business, but rather trying to get existing ones to break their contracts with our client. Using the company laptop to try to do it just made it way easier to catch them when the company IT guy found all the emails. And for privacy reasons, I won't say what industry it was, but to the person W asked, no, it was not a high-end service. I've never had to deal with one of TSE. I did have to ask a witness once about a sugar daddy website once, so that was fun. Story 5. I was reviewing the transcript of an interview with a child. The child made incriminating statements against my client. At one point, when discussing the allegations, the child used an odd word, but I didn't think much of it. A few days later, I was watching a video of the child interacting with their grandmother. W hates my client, from about a week before that interview. The grandmother used the exact same odd word in the exact context the child later used it. At that moment, it became clear that child had been coached. It was the first real aha moment of my career. Story 6. I worked on a case involving defective processors. In discovery, we got emails from the defendant's engineers that had worked on the processors. They were in an Asian country, but the emails were in English because they were going to US executives. One of the more senior engineers basically laid out the exact defect we were suing over, explaining what the problem was and why it was their fault, and finishing with, "This is big problem, we ship crap to customer." Needless to say, we hit them over the head with that in mediation and they settled certainly after. Story 7. My client has been keeping her son away from the father because the father has a new child. She is concerned that her son will act violently towards the new child and she could be held liable. Judge, that's not even a defense. Story 8. Not a lawyer, but I played one in small claims court. My lease had an exit clause that said if I fronted 2 months' rent, they would work to lease my place and return anything unused. I checked with the office ahead of time. They ensured me there was a waiting list, so I gave them the 2 months and moved. They never returned a dime. I talked to the new tenant and confirmed they moved in a week later. In court, the judge was commenting on W. He didn't see anything explicitly saying they would return any unused rent. Even that intent was stated to me a few times. Dumbo from the leasing office piped in with, "Your nor, in almost every case we can return some money, but in this case, we didn't have a tenant in the 2 months after he left." So she gave the case back to me, and I presented the affidavit from the new tenant confirming the move-in date. Judge awarded me double what they owed. Turns out leasing office dumbos 1 and 2 taught they could lie to me and return my excess rent money to themselves. Story 9. It was my 3rd month of practice. I was in family law at the time, representing mom and a peon for a restraining order against boyfriend dad. At issue in the broader case was child visitation, custody, support, etc. But today's hearing was just on the RO. We had pretty good facts, but it was mostly asterisk based on testimony of the parties. My client was way more reputable as a witness, so I was feeling confident. 10 minutes before the hearing, my client swowers up. I give her a last-minute prep on what to expect, and then she says, "I'm glad I'm going through with this. I can't deal with it anymore, and he's just getting worse." To top it off, he left me a drunken, ranting voicemail on Saturday. "You have your P&E with you?" Yes, we play the voicemail, and it's a full 2 minutes of ex-boyfriend screaming like I should having killed you when we were together. "You were always such a... IP you burned to death in a fire." I didn't have time to ask her why she hadn't said anything to me about the voicemail before the bailiff called our case. We sit. The judge asks if either side has additional evidence, and I ask for permission to play the voicemail. Ex-boyfriend, you didn't have an attorney, didn't object, so I played the WLE nasty 2-minute rant in open court. Judge goes, "We're going to take a brief recess before I issue my ruling. If the parties want to meet and confer in the hall, they are welcome to." Boyfriend knew he was Ed. We settled the WLE case then and there. My client got her wish list in terms of custody, supervised visitation, child support, plus the restraining order to boot. Story 10. I'm a trial lawyer. I have a ton of these. My favorite was probably a DUI where the cop was in a BWW with my client watching a fight. Like, the cop was standing at the bar in full uniform. Then when my client walked by him to leave, followed him out. Client was only actually going to his car to grab his P&E charger because he was going me with the bartender, like he hadn't even closed his tab yet. Cop arrested him and charged him with DUI for opening his car door, then fabricated this story for his report about client got in car, turned it on, and began to pull out of the space to leave the parking lot. He also denied being inside the BWW on the stand, under oath, to my face. Surprise! I talked to the bartender at BWW and got the security tape. It very clearly, like surprisingly good quality, don't try to steal from a BWW, swed cop standing at the bar, watching my client walk out the front door, then follow him 30 seconds later. Parking lot cam also swed client barely touched the door handle before cop stopped him. Edit, Buffalo Wild Wings. I apologize, LOL. Edit 2. Since a lot of people are seeing this, I'll add, the cop underwent an internal review where the board determined he hadn't done anything wrong. A few months ago, he murdered an unarmed man while on patrol. He also trains new cops now and tells young college girls he pulls over to call him Tommy. Bit of a soapbox. Cops don't need a reason to lie about what you say, do, or didn't say do. I read hundreds of police reports. None of them are 100% nest. Cops lie under oath all the time. This story is just fun, because I gotta prove him wrong and save my client from a conviction. If you are stopped by a cop for any reason, make sure you know your rights. Do not offer information. Do not consent to a search. Do not have lengthy contact with a lawyer present or asking if you're under arrest. Story 11. Not a lawyer. Years ago, I had to do something at a strip mall in a bad part of town. Took me about 20 minutes, and then I found that my car had been towed. Ubered to the tow yard. Giant sign says, cash only. Had to call another Uber, drive to the ATM and back, and pay them $300 some bucks. Got a Thai handwritten receipt that, believe it or not, was itemized. Went me, Googled, found that they violated the law in 3 separate ways. Towed illegally, illegally refused to accept credit cards, and had multiple charges that the law called unreasonable, like dolly fees and unload fees. Took them to small claims court. The judge began by asking the tow yard owner about his relationship with the property owner, and the decision was made to tow my car. "Oh," the slimy tow truck dude answered. "My cousin works there. If he says tow, I tow. It's 100% legal." The judge's eyebrows began to rise. "But," the dude continued, "but what I detest the most, your Nor, is this asshole claiming I don't take credit cards. I'm a businessman. I take credit cards all the time. He's a lowlife that does not have any credit cards. That's why he wanted to pay cash." I was having a hold it overload, and the judge saw me smiling and peeping in my seat and patting my manila folder of receipts. "Do you actually not have any credit or debit cards?" the judge asked me. I pulled out my wallet and sweat him, and then I pulled out a time-stamped PTO of the cash-only sign I took the day of, and another one I took the morning of the hearing. The guy mumbled something like, "Okay, you got me there," and then had nothing but, "Huh," I didn't know that. When the judge asked him about the legality of each unreasonable itemized charge. Anyway, each violation pays double the total tow charge. And since there were three, that's W. I made $1,800 on a $300 investment. Story 12. My client was accused of brutally murdering a dog. Cop testified that there was no testing of the blood, no body ever found, and admitted it could have, in fact, run away. The eyewitness said she could see the killing down the hallway from the dining room. Cop testified there was no hallway, and the dining room was on a different level of the use than the killing supposedly took place. Then the person W was leading the lynch mob against my client around town for the last year testified that she had been in the apartment between the two visits by the cop to evaluate the scene. No body, a compromised crime scene, witness W couldn't see anything, and admission that there was no proof the dog was dead. Closing argument lasted 3 seconds. Your Noor, I'm asking for an acquittal. Edit, my first award, thanks. For TCW asked, this was in Canada and received a fair bit of media attention prior to trial. Story 13. When I compared the scanned copy of the deed provided by the other side's lawyers to the original, my client eventually got around to providing. The scanned copy provided by the other side had a witness signature. The original did not. Story 14. My mom hit a guy on a bike with her car in a parking lot. She claimed he hit her. She also wanted to counter-sue the cyclist for scaring her. In her deposition, she started every sentence with, when I hit him. Story 15. Iano, but a friend of mine, was a DWI attorney in New York for a while. He was defending a guy W was asleep in the backseat of his car while intoxicated, and an NYS trooper arrested him. On the stand, the trooper testified that he visually saw the key in the ignition. My friend gave him like 3 chances to walk it back. Are you sure, trooper, that you actually saw the key in the ignition? Yes, counselor. When a cop calls a lawyer counselor, he really means. And then my buddy dropped the hammer. You are aware that my client drives a Toyota Prius? Bam. Edit, 13 URs later. For all the people pointing out that there's a spot for the fob in the dashboard of some Prius models, etc., you have to understand that in a court of law, words have meanings. Ignition is most certainly specifically defined in NYS law as being what we all commonly understand as the ignition. The point is that the trooper, since their main duty is traffic enforcement on the roads, are expected to be experts on the cars. Also, he lied on the stand. He wasn't mistaken. He made it up and got caught. Yes, in NY, having the keys on your person while in the car is being under control of the vehicle, and thus can be arrested for DUI, DWI, but you can't sever the perjured testimony from the rest of the case. He lied. He got caught. My buddy moved for immediate dismissal, and the DA didn't argue. Case dismissed. Nothing happened to the trooper. As to why the trooper did this. Promotions and overtime. Imagine you're running the entire New York State Police. You have about 5,000 troopers. What metric do you use to gauge W effectively they're performing their tasks? For the most part, troopers ride alone. So Trooper #1 drives around all day on his shift and issues 0 tickets and makes 0 arrests. Trooper #2 manages to issue, say, 5 tickets a day and makes a DWI arrest 4 times a month. You're going to me that Trooper #2 is doing his job. An aggressive officer is one that has a lot of tickets and a lot of arrests. Also, court appearances are almost always on overtime. Police unions are very specific about overtime pay rates and when they apply. If you're an effective trooper and you write lots of tickets, you're going to be in court a lot at 1. 5 your early rate, sometimes 2. 0 your early rate, depending. Also, Yanal has long been internet speak for I am not a lawyer. Story 16. Not a lawyer, but we had no evidence that the woman W slammed into my stopped car going 85 miles per hour was drunk, until she indignantly admitted it on tape in her deposition. She busted into my deposition and demanded she go first because I was lying. She excitedly told my lawyer that the police report was wrong because it said she was coming from the movie theater when she was actually coming from her friend's bar. Did you have anything to drink at your friend's bar? Of course. How many drinks? I don't know. They just keep my GL full. Did you take any medicine that day? Metin and low blood pressure medicine. I see. The cops had refused to breathalyzer her at the scene because her husband was a firefighter that they knew personally. They told her to go sober up, and go to the spittle later. I heard the WLE thing, but had no proof until she handed it to me. They settled same day. Story 17. Not exactly a knew you would win moment, but I got a hidden sut out from a federal judge in a ruling that I consider to be one of the high points of my career. Here's what happened. Before a hearing for an emergency injunction against USDA, I was watching the hearing before mine, a trademark infringement case. At the end of that hearing, the judge accidentally used a pun and could not stop laughing. She was literally crying. I decided at that moment I was going to intentionally use a pun in my hearing. I did. I accused USDA of engaging in a S game by illegally diverting some federal funds to an egg industry trade group. The judge called me on it, but laughed heartily. My client won. The judge threatened to put the Secretary of Agriculture in jail. A major newspaper reporting on the case said the judge winced at my puns but agreed with my arguments. False. When the written ruling was issued, the last sentence said that an injunction was issued against USDA's use of the funds for any plans they may be hatching. Undeniable suit-out. Story 18. I clerk for a judge, and we had a low-level thief in our courtroom. W had robbed one of his neighbor's uses in the winter in Colorado, and all the police had to do was follow the footsteps back to his use where he was hanging out with the stolen items and a small amount of drugs and a tie handgun. Idiot. Edited for clarity. Story 19 obligatory. Not mine, but my mom's story. She was fighting for custody on behalf of the father, trying to prove that the kids were living in subpar conditions with their drug addict mother in spite of the ample child support provided. It was a tough case because courts are so hesitant to pull kids away from their moms. Then the mom burst out that she had been feeding the kids cat food as proof that she wouldn't let them starve. Needless to say, the judge didn't take that as a good reason for the kids to stay with their mom. Story 20. I can't believe I'm about to use the not a lawyer, but loan, but here goes. LOL tried to sell me myself, and the buyers wanted a term period for land contract before getting their own mortgage. I agreed to 1 year, had a simple contract drawn up, and after we both signed it, everything seemed fine. Within 30 days, the present me with their own legally drawn-up land contract that was pages long to protect their investment. About page 3, it very clearly stated that if for any reason the me burns down, purchaser will receive all insurance proceeds. First, I still had a mortgage, and the proceeds would legally go to pay that off. Second, that's a pretty targeted thing to say. Not lawyers' terms of the use being destroyed, and it's surrounded by and waterways, just if it burnt down. Page 4 stated that this would remain a land contract until my mortgage was paid in full, so they'd never buy outright. I returned it to them with a letter stating TSE 2 things were never happening and I wasn't signing. They stopped paying, so I began eviction. 6 months later, the lawyer I hired was an idiot, and I'm sitting down with their lawyer myself. He brings out the contract they'd tried giving me and began talking about their ironclad case due to the agreement. I asked him to SW me my signature. The look on his face when he realized it wasn't there. After we talked, it turned out he knew them and wrote the contract with Toot the Burn, the use down stipulation. Seems they added it. And under the belief it was a long-term land contract. Not only did I win, I'm pretty sure they lost a lawyer friend. Story 21, not lawyer, but represented myself in court. Got a parking ticket and contested it due to misleading signs. Took a bunch of pictures and brought it to court. Judge agreed and dismissed the case. Hold up. What about the towing fees, I asked as he was about to read the next case. Got TSE back too. Story 22. Not a lawyer, but I'm currently in a custody battle. Mother is saying I can't be trusted because I've been refusing to take our child to the therapist. The therapist testified I couldn't bring our child in because therapy must have both parents' consent, and mother has retracted consent. Story 23. Not a lawyer. I was a volunteer family advocate. I worked with families W were falsely accused of child abuse. Part of that was going to court with them. I was contacted by a family WSE children were in foster care because of parental drug use. The family claimed that they didn't do drugs and that no one would believe them. They had a court-appointed attorney W did nothing but tell them to stop using drugs. I honestly didn't believe them. I was pretty jaded. I told them to request their case file for me to review. I was surprised when they called me back and had the case file. I met with them and went through everything. I noticed claims of drug use, court findings of drug use, but no test results in their paperwork. I told them to ask for the results. Long story SRT, the caseworker wouldn't give them the actual results, and the lab wouldn't either. So I drug tested them myself at a different lab. They tested clean. Color me sicked? There were 4 months to go until the next court date. Every time CPS drug tested them, they went right after to the other lab and did a second test. All clean. I told them to tell the lawyer beforehand that if CPS claimed any dirty drug tests, to ask in court for the test results. He didn't want to. I was starting to get mad. So, the day of court, I had a stack of clean drug test results in my bag. The lawyer wouldn't even look at them, and he was openly hostile to my presence and involvement. Court starts. I had been in this judge's courtroom before with other families. The CPS supervisor stands up and says that the parents have had 12 dirty drug screens in the past 6 months. The lawyer actually did ask her for the results. She said she didn't have them with her. I got the results out of my bag and handed them to the mom W was next to the lawyer. She tried to get him to take them, but he ignored her. I got so aided that the judge said, "Mrs. Baez looks like she's about to have a stroke. What's going on?" I stood up and explained that we had clean drug tests taken immediately after the mandated ones that CPS claimed were dirty. I briefly explained that the parents had tried getting copies of their results and had been refused. I said that the parents had consistently denied ever using drugs and had clean tests to prove it. The judge ordered CPS to provide copies of all the drug test results at a hearing in a week. At that hearing, the case was closed and the children were released from foster care. The family never got an apology from anyone, but they were too traumatized to pursue it. They packed up and moved away within a month. Story 24. Very abbreviated. I was prosecuting a convenience store owner for luring a young girl. You regularly came into the store, back to a part of the store to fondle and kiss her. Child enticement. It was the only section of the store with toot surveillance camera coverage. They were in the back room for about 2 minutes and 17 seconds, per the timestamp on the videos. Of the many arguments the defense put on, one was there was no way there was enough time for anything to happen. In my rebuttal on closing, I asked the jury to imagine what could happen in the room in that amount of time, and I asked them to all close their eyes while I timed out 2 minutes and 17 seconds on my watch, in silence. After about 60 seconds, 2 of the jurors started crying. Knew it was going to be guilty right then. Story 25. My client was riding his motorcycle on a relatively calm street when this guy exited his garage, we toot looking, and run over him. In deposition, the guy brought a witness that was with him on the penger seat. The WLE time, the witness maintained that my client was driving too fast and that there was no time to brake the car. I asked him the same question a few times in different ways, making him tell the story again. In the fourth telling, he, already a bit frustrated, let it slip. Look, I've already told you. We were exiting the garage and as soon as I lifted up from getting my cell penny on the car's carpet **. Wait, so you didn't even see the crash? There was no coming back from that. Story 26. The plaintiff was being deposed in the lawsuit she filed alleging UL discrimination. She was claiming her boss had made some inappropriate innuendos and overtures. The defense attorney asked her if when the alleged statements or events took place, was she shocked? No. Was she offended? No. Was she damaged in any way? No. So why exactly are we here? Well, Nestle, I'd rather not be. Meanwhile, her attorney stared straight down, scribbling notes, doodling. We ended the deposition there and asked her attorney if this was going away now. We got a call later offering to settle for $1,000 and a letter of apology. My best guess is she was pressured by a friend or family to talk to an attorney, and the lawyers ran with it with Toot really talking to their client. Story 27. This was actually fairly recent. I was in a deposition of a fact witness to an automobile accident in which my client was killed. The defendant's attorney had called the deposition, and over the course of an hour and a half or so elicited a lot of testimony which seemed to place my client partially at fault, which would impact my client's financial recovery. After sitting quietly for an hour and a half, I asked less than a dozen questions, the last of which was about the specific location of my client when he had first seen them. Based on his answer, it was clear that my client couldn't possibly be at fault. I sent a follow-up letter that same day, and the case had settled within the next 2 weeks. Story 28 moments like this usually happen at bond hearings for me. It almost never fails. If the judge starts by saying something good for our side, he's going to deny bond 9 times out of 10. But if the judge starts by saying things like these are some serious allegations and all tough, he's not prejudging the case, there seem to have been some bad decisions made, etc. That's usually just the judge trying to put the fear of God in the defendant before granting bond, so he'll behave while out on bond. Story 29. So I filed the lawsuit in January. We exchanged discovery, each side sends questionnaires and gets carefully worded answers, over the next few months, and I file a motion for summary judgment, meaning I'm asking the court to let me win the case to a jury because the case is so obvious. Right before I file this motion, I figure let's review the discovery materials and see if there's anything I missed. And what do you know, the other side made a mive mistake on literally just the 4th out of 100 plus questions that I asked. It's a dog bite case, and every single time I asked about the bite, the response says something along the lines of, "We admit to this and that, but we deny that our dog was involved in any dog attack." Well, question 4 asks whether they admit that their dog was not leashed on the day when it bit my client, and they simply answer, admit. Meaning they admit their dog was not leashed, and they admit that their dog was the one that bit my client. That was the one thing that was genuinely in dispute. They tried to argue at the hearing that it was a mistake, and they only meant to admit to the lack of a leash, but the judge held them to their word, most likely because the other evidence made it clear it could only have been their dog anyway. Edit. For everyone hating on this for being misleading and the reason everyone hates lawyers, I'll clarify that at the time I wrote the questions, I would not have dreamed that they would have to deny their dog's involvement. Their dog obviously was the one that did it. They let their dog out every day, no leash, and it terrorized the neighborhood for months, killing chickens, fighting with people's dogs, chasing cars, before it finally bit my client. It was the only dog that ever did this. And yet the insurance company tried to lowball my clients and refused to even cover their medical bills. So after 2 years of negotiating, they finally lawyered up. Story 30. I knew the cops beat up my client and framed him. They described a knife in his possession that caused them to fear for their safety. Oddly, they never seized it. We won the criminal case and filed a civil rights case. While deposing one, he described the knife in detail. No more than 3 minutes later, he slipped up and claimed his partner told him my guy had a knife, but he never saw it himself. I told him, "That's not what you just said," and saw him panic. His lawyer panicked too and asked to see me outside. When we got in the hallway, I withdrew my settlement demand, and the case settled for a substantially larger amount within 45 minutes. Story 31. My attorney had this moment in my initial consultation with him for my BWI charge. Yes, boating. The sheriff's department conducted the field sobriety tests on the deck, or their small vessel in a heavily traveled waterway, rather than taking me to dry land. Charges were thrown immediately out after my attorney brought this to the attention of the DA. Edit. I sold ad. This attorney was a sheriff's deputy on Marine Patrol for 12 years prior to going to law school. I interviewed 3 different attorneys, and he was the last. The other 2 quoted me $35K for the defense. He said that he would never tell a client a case is a slam dunk, but he charged $700 and said he would see the case through trial. It didn't get dismissed with no additional fee. It was thrown out by the end of the week. Story 32. Parent termination case I was prosecuting. Dad went on WU. He has changed his life around and worked the AA program. Asked him what step he was on, and he proudly proclaimed 3. Asked him what step 3 is. He had no idea. Then asked him step 2 was. Again, no idea. Parental rights terminated. Parental. Story 33. At a restraining order trial, it was essentially my client's word versus his, regarding a UL alt. He did a good job dressing up and acting very appropriate during most of his testimony. But then he was asked a series of open-ended questions, and he said something to the effect that she kept coming up on me with that ingsi, allegedly during a lecture. And as soon as he said it, a look came on his face, and the judge's face, and everyone knew the ruse of respectable young gentlemen had failed. I won. Story 34. When I found a video on Facebook of the plaintiff squatting 300 pounds the month before his deposition, that was a good one. Oh, he was saying he couldn't work and had back injuries after a minor car accident. Edit. Just as a follow-up, I sent the video to his attorney afterward the deposition, and the case immediately went away. He also adamantly denied being able to work out or doing any lifting during his deposition. It was a big lie. Also, I agree that this really is for the people with limate injuries. People quickly want to just label litigious. Story 35. I'm not a lawyer, but I've been up against plenty of them as a union chief steward. Years ago, we had an arbitration related to healthcare costs. The company spent the better part of a year trying to break us from pursuing the case. The day had come for our arbitration. The lawyer, there were 3 actually, we were up against was actually Paul Newman's nephew. Anyway, it was my turn to take the stand. His first question to me was presenting the grievance as evidence and asking me what step it said it was on at the top of the page. Our grievance process is a 2-step system, progressing to arbitration if it's not settled. I said, 2nd step. Then he smugly asks, and where is the 1st step? To which I replied, the 1st step is a verbal discussion. It goes into writing at the 2nd step. He looked hurt but persevered anyway. A few more questions in, he asked, if the entire company got base-level insurance instead of a premium option, that would satisfy the contract. At this point, he was ping. I would argue that the base-level insurance wasn't sufficient because he was trying to paint the picture that we were just trying to get premium insurance at a base-level price. I responded with yes. He looked demounded, asked me, yes? I said again, yes, that would satisfy the language in the contract. He kind of looked at his other papers he was going to submit as evidence, then muttered, no further questions. I knew at that moment that they had brought no real argument to the table. We got our answer from the arbitrator 6 weeks later during a contract negotiations meeting. It was insanely satisfying watching them read the email during one of the sessions, and the immediate shift in demeanor from their side of the table. They got real quiet. We were awarded 100% of the arbitration, full back pay for all employees that were being overcharged, and reduced rate for the premium insurance. Story 36. Not a lawyer, but a client. In my divorce trial, my ex-wife has spent about 2 years explaining to the court what a POS I was, and all the ribble things I had done to her and my children, and that I was unfit to be a parent. 2 solid ers. Lie upon lie. Just 6 months earlier, my wife had snuck into my use. She's the one W moved out, and went on my computer to type me a love letter. Oh, you're so wonderful. You're such an amazing father, great provider, great husband. You've done so much for the community. Please don't leave me! That's the gist of it. Well, she didn't print it or sign. It was just a file on my computer left on the screen for me to find. So our challenge, after all her testimony to the contrary, get her to admit she wrote this letter. I told my attorney, ask her. She won't be able to lie if she's sworn in. Plus, she's going to feel incredibly guilty about all these lies. So, he handed her a printout. He had one too. He started reading it. He asked her, continue the reading. She started to cry. He asked her, do you remember writing this letter? Her face was shriveling. She looked at her attorney and said, I'm sorry, Sandy, her attorney's first name. Then she looked at the courtroom and said, yes, I wrote this. There was silence for a few moments. Then the judge said, attorneys, in my chambers, now. My attorney told me later. The judge understood that when your wife said, I'm sorry, Sandy, that meant that her attorney was aware this letter might be brought up and that she had instructed her client to lie. The judge was furious. Back in the courtroom, my attorney went down the list lie by lie. Did he really do this? Did he really do that? When you say he was doing this, wasn't it really that? Etc. Then he had her read the entire letter again. After that, my divorce went from me being 1/2 inch away from losing all custody and relegated to supervised visits to, I got full custody. Made for TV or what?